I want to tell you right now, there is no penalty in the rule book that says, after the game, email your assigner to complain about the broken rule. Hey everyone, welcome into the pregame. This is Patrick Farber. Hope you're off to a good week. I'm getting my first day off in quite a while, so I wanted to jump on here and talk with y'all about my 3 most recent high school games and some of the interesting situations that have come up in them. I thought there were some really good learning lessons for my crews, and there's always something I can take away from these games. So I figured some of this might be beneficial to all of you. To start, I wanted to cover the high school game we had on Monday. I worked the plate with a partner on the bases. This was a partner I've never worked with before, but he's been part of our high school association for quite a while, and we've also he's worked for some games for my youth association that I assign. So it was good to finally get on the field with him. It was a pretty competitive game. Not a lot of runs. Final score was 3-2. We did have a couple interesting plays though. In the bottom of the third, we had a potential interference situation with a runner from first going to second on a ball hit to the second baseman. And this is a tough one because the second baseman yielded to the runner trying to advance to second, but he yielded at enough distance that you could argue he really wasn't trying to make a play on the ball yet, and that he was basically just going to let the ball come through and then make a play on it after the runner went by. That's always a hard one to judge, especially as the base umpire on a runner going from first to second, because you're in the B position, you're turning with the ball, and you're just not going to get a you're not going to get a full look at the play as it develops. That kind of it's a limitation of the 2 umpire system. So you're turning with that, and the play's happening as you're turning to look at it. So we ended up going with no interference, but it's definitely one to think about and definitely be aware of. Now, to have interference, do we need to have physical contact? Not necessarily. But if the fielder says, I'm not going to get the ball until you go past it, is that automatically interference? Also, not necessarily. And more importantly, this is a judgment call, and these interference calls, they're difficult to make. What made this one especially interesting was that the visiting coach came out to ask about it, and it turned into a great example of why you should never say the first words when a coach comes out to ask about a play. Because his question was there contact? Well, we knew there wasn't contact. For us as the umpires, that really wasn't the question that we had. But that's the question he asked about, and once my partner said no, the coach said okay and walked away. So we didn't even have to argue really the very technical parts of the rule. It ended up just being a yes-no question. So sometimes the best thing you can do is let the coach ask his actual question before you start answering something else. Then later in the game, we had another interesting one, and this is a learning point that really hasn't been taught as much as it should be, but it's super important. If we have a batted ball that is threatening to leave the field of play for a home run, all eyes of the crew should be on that ball leaving the field. That's more important than touches of bases, tag-ups, interference, obstruction, all of that. All eyes of the crew, whether you're in a crew of 2, 3, 4, or 6, should be on that ball leaving the field of play. That's especially important on a pole bender down one of the lines. It used to be that at the MLB level, before replay, they would tell you that the one with the best angle on a potential pole bender home run was actually the second base umpire. And that's just because of the different angle and the depth. It provides a really good insight to where that ball crossed. And in a crew of 2, we often have that umpire in the middle, and he has just the same view that the second base umpire would have in a crew of 4. So it's really beneficial to have all eyes on that ball leaving the field of play. And again, that's before we even talk about things like just your plate umpire losing it in the lights or what have you. So always want to have the entire crew looking when that ball leaves the field. Now again, on this specific pole bender, and with me on the plate, I gained distance up the third base line, but it was a very quick line drive pole bender on about a 300-foot fence, and it looked like it should have been well foul, but it was one that he just hit straight enough that it wasn't obviously hooking foul like you would think. And as I was tracking it, I kind of lost it towards the end in a dark corner of the field. And then I saw the ball come down on the foul side of the third base foul pole, and I came up with a foul mechanic. Now, I was fairly confident that was correct, but I also knew I potentially could have missed it. And if the coach had come out and asked me about it, I would have gone to my partner and said, hey, what do you have? Did you have anything different? And that can be super helpful, especially when we don't have replay, when we're only in a crew of two, and when we play on a lot of fields where the lining in the outfield corners just isn't very good. So thankfully, I must have gotten the call right because there were no complaints and no arguments. And the offensive head coach was coaching third base, so he was even closer than I was. But when I asked my partner about it after the game, he said, oh, I wasn't looking. I was looking at the runner tagging. That's something we just need to teach better. On a potential home run, foul pole bender, whatever, it needs to be all eyes on the ball. We all need to have an opinion on fair, foul, and whether or not it left the field of play. Now, I did get to have a little bit of fun in that game on the plate. One of the home team's pitching coaches was not appreciative of my strike zone, and I was not appreciative of the catching I was getting, but, I don't get to yell at them about that. That's fine. But still, it led into something I've noticed a lot lately, and that's a lot of our umpires not standing up to coaches when they need to. Now, that doesn't mean you have to respond to the first little, that ball's not up or whatever, but sometimes there does need to be a response, and more often than not, that response should not immediately be, that's enough. Remember, just arguing balls and strikes by itself is not a standalone ejectionable offense. In fact, when you look at NFHS 3-3-1F6, what it says is that a coach shall not commit any unsportsmanlike act, including a member of the coaching staff who is not the head coach, leaving the vicinity of the dugout or coaching box to dispute a judgment call by an umpire. So yes, balls and strikes are judgment calls, but the rule is really addressing leaving their position to argue that call. Nowhere does it just say, if they argue balls and strikes, they can be immediately ejected. And when you look at the professional and collegiate rules, that's where you're going to see the specific language as well about leaving your position to argue balls and strikes as being immediately ejectionable. So if a coach is yelling at you about balls and strikes from the dugout, it probably needs to be addressed, but it's not an immediate ejection. So long as it's not profanity, personal abuse, or some other escalated conduct, it probably doesn't warrant an immediate ejection or probably even an immediate warning. So we want to work through the 5 steps of an ejection that I talked about in a video last year. Ignore, acknowledge, respond, warn, and eject. Now, the first thing is ignore, and we all do that, and we probably do it too much. After that, we've acknowledged. Really, all that is actually is just looking into the dugout, just showing them that you hear them. We don't need a verbal response. We don't need to warn, just a visual look into the dugout. And often that will be enough to get a coach to realize, oh, he's on to me and stop, especially with assistant coaches. And then the other benefit of that is you're also starting to identify who it is in the dugout that's making all this noise. And if you're going to toss someone, you're trying to get an idea of which one it's going to be. So after that, we then get to respond. Now, respond is not, that's enough. That's enough is a warning, and we don't want to jump on a warning too soon because once you warn, you're drawing a line that you'll have to enforce with an ejection if they keep going. So a response is something more like, no, that pitch is inside, or yes, that ball is there. Something confident, something that says, I know what I saw. It doesn't need to be demeaning or insulting. It just needs to show confidence in your own call. In this game, the pitching coach yelled at me about an inside pitch. He wanted to be a strike, and it wasn't a big situation in the game. I get it. But he was standing near the end of the dugout, almost poking his head out to yell at me, and I pulled my mask off, looked him dead in the eyes, and shouted back, that's a good pitch. And when you look him in the eyes, take your mask off, show the confidence in your face that you got the call right, they get the message pretty quick. And I did not have to deal with him after that. But again, at the same time, doing that, I haven't necessarily drawn the full warning line yet. Granted, taking the mask off means you're pretty damn close, but still, there's those steps before we get to just, that's enough. And so I did that. He was quiet for the rest of the night, really no issues. But ultimately, what this gets back to, and this is what I've seen other umpires struggling with, is that sometimes if we don't stand up for ourselves early, we let these things compile and then they start to rattle our game. You can't be afraid to go through these tips and hit them early. There are absolutely things in a game that can get someone ejected in the first inning. If they hit that bar, enforce it. But if they haven't, then go ahead and work through the progression. So that was game one. Game two was the next day, and this one was a crew of three and featured a lovely hour and 15-minute lightning delay. But no, that's not the one that's going to be in the video coming out soon, hopefully. But I was third base umpire in this one. Honestly, not a whole lot of excitement in the game itself. Low scoring, competitive, but not a lot of crazy stuff, especially at third base. The one thing I did have to address, though, as crew chief happened pretty early on, and if you're following the Facebook page, you can probably guess what it was. So the visiting team's base coaches came out of the dugout to start the game. They come up, the third base coach shakes your hand if you're the third base umpire. But pretty quickly I realized, dude, you're just wearing a t-shirt tucked into your baseball pants. Now, this is common for coaches to wear like during warm-ups and stuff. Especially this time of year when it's starting to warm up. And that's when you start to see, kind of without really thinking about it, they stop wearing the quarter zips or the windbreakers. It's what a lot of players wear at practice. It's what coaches like to wear before a game when they're working the field. But regardless, it's not acceptable during the game. Remember, by rule, coaches have to be in uniform to be on the field. If they're not, they're restricted to the dugout. That's what it says in the rule book. Now, that means they either need to be wearing the same uniform pants and uniform top as the players, or at least, an approved team jacket, windbreaker, or sweatshirt as the top. T-shirts don't qualify. This is where game management comes in. I know the coach fairly well, and you have to weigh this stuff. Is it against the rules? Yes, and the rules specifically say if they are not in uniform, they are restricted to the dugout. But we also need to pick the right hills to die on. It absolutely does need to be addressed, even if it's just telling them that and maybe not enforcing something. But it doesn't always need to be addressed immediately. If it was a TV game or a playoff game or something with a lot more attention on it, maybe I address it differently. This was just a random Tuesday night game. So after the half inning, I called over the visiting head coach and said, hey, your base coaches are not in uniform. They're wearing a t-shirt tucked in, which is not uniform, and they have to be in uniform. They could wear a cutoff jacket or a t-shirt jacket. It was a t-shirt with a hoodie that he had on. They can wear something like that. They can wear a windbreaker, but a t-shirt just isn't going to cut it. And of course, he told me he didn't know that was a rule, and then said, well, it's not a rule for coaches, though. And I was like, no, it definitely is. And that comes in 1-4 and 3-2-1. The rule applies to team personnel and specifically even calls out that coaches not in proper uniform are restricted to the bench and dugout. So I told him that. Now, what's funny is that before that, I had actually talked to one of my partners about it right after the top of the first, before I went to talk to the coach. And I kind of quizzed my partner on it, the first base umpire, and said, what are we supposed to do in this situation? And his response was, email our assigner. I want to tell you right now, there is no penalty in the rule book that says, after the game, email your assigner to complain about the broken rule. It's not in there. Yes, there are some GHSA things where they want a game note later, like if the field isn't lined properly or there's no runner's lane. But this is a rule in the rule book, and it has a penalty. And that penalty needs to be enforced on the field. So if you got worked up about it enough and noticed it enough that you thought, I need to email it to my assigner, you probably just need to handle it yourself. Now, that doesn't mean you have to be a jerk about it, and we can enforce things in a way that is calm, practical, and not necessarily confrontational. So, I went up to him. I told him that's against the rule. I said they're really supposed to wear a sweatshirt. He asked if I would just let it go. I said, it's not a hill I'm willing to die on. I more or less just told him that. And, he made a joke that, he didn't really like the fit of the shirts anyways, and that they were a little too tight for him. Fair enough. But what mattered is this. I addressed the rule. I explained it. And you know what? The next inning, they came out proper tops. They had their quarter zips or whatever on. And then after that, he actually came out to me later and said they had it figured out and would be in sweatshirts the rest of the game. And they were. So I addressed a rule that needed to be addressed. I didn't make a big scene. I didn't affect the pace of play with it. And it wasn't as egregious as some of the stuff we've seen, like coaches out there in blue jeans or sweatpants. I even kind of alluded at, this isn't a hill I'm going to die on, and I'm not going to start restricting and ejecting to argue this case. But the main takeaway here is simple. When you see these things, take care of them on the field. There's really nothing that the take care of it option is you email your assigner after the game. Just bring it up, address it. Even if it is one of those little things, you don't have to be a dick about it, and you don't have to die on that hill. But I brought it up to him in a casual way. I didn't say, if they don't come out, I'm restricting them to the dugout for the rest of the game. I brought up the rule, told them they're really supposed to be in compliance. And you know what? They came out the next inning in compliance. That's really all we want. Now, another thing from that game, just mechanically, was this. In a crew of 3 with nobody on, when a ball is hit to the left side, the first base umpire can come in as though he's going to pivot, almost like he would in a crew of 2, and then adjust based on what his third base umpire does. That's a mechanic that we published in Referee Magazine. I think it was February or March edition. It's a great mechanic because if the third base umpire makes a late decision to go out, the first base umpire is already in a position to still take a play at second. You know, too often I see first base umpires read their partner too quickly or not read them at all and come down in foul territory wanting to see the touch at first before maybe rotating home. But then they realize their partner went out and now they're behind the runner in a foot race to second. There's nothing lost by coming in inside to the inside cutout at first, seeing the touch from there, and then going off of how your partner responded to the play. Doing that really only increases your chances of covering second if something gets misread. The second mechanic point from that game is communication. And we need to be louder, especially in a 3-umpire situation. We need to be louder and more definitive on whether or not we're going out. That helps in 2 ways. 1, it makes sure everyone on the crew knows what's happening. And 2, sometimes it's the last little kick another umpire needs to move. You know, it goes for going out, but it also covers rotations. For example, if I'm on the plate and rotating to third in a playoff game with a crew that is not as experienced in a three umpire system, then I'm yelling, rotate, 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 loud enough that, yes, I want my third base umpire to know that I'm coming up, but I'm also trying to tell my first base umpire, you're going to have home. And that can often be the kick that they need to get them to go. Same thing if I'm working first base. If I identify, especially as the crew chief, a rotation, and I think I can still get them in time if I can get them to react, then I'll yell at my plate umpire, rotate. And more often than not, if I do that, they go. Probably without thinking about it, but that's kind of the point. We don't want them getting caught up, and we just can't afford for them to take too much time thinking about it. We're trying to just get that instinct. You can be a crew saver by just communicating that. And I'll add one more thing onto that, and this also goes back to my weekend series at the college level. When you're the plate umpire and there's a possibility to rotate to third, being in a crew of 2 or 3, think of first to third situation, we have to make a decision quickly if we can go yes or no, especially if the runner from first base is stealing. Because if they're stealing, by the time that ball's hit and through the infield, they might already be pretty close to second, and you've barely come out of your squat. And as the plate umpire, you're the quarterback on rotations. If we've got this runner on first, stealing on the pitch, especially with a good jump, then there's a really good chance you're not going to make it, even if you are a super fast umpire. And frankly, that's okay. What's important is that you identify that early enough, and then call out to your partner, I'm staying home. And then that tells your base umpire that he has third. In a 3-umpire system, it might even give your first base umpire enough time to pop in to the cutout and potentially take the batter runner to second if needed. But the key here is that if you're going to go, then you yell early. You say, I've got third if he comes. Then once you know there will be a play, I've got third. That applies again in a crew of 2 or a crew of 3, but that lets your other umpires release and rotate and know where they need to go. Again, the thing here is communication is everything, as well as being realistic about our potential to get to third as the plate umpire. There is nothing wrong with just admitting, I'm not going to make it, especially when the runner was stealing and they're a 20-year-old college or high school athlete. So communicate with that, but most importantly, as the plate umpire, just make your decision quick, especially if you see him stealing. Your base umpire has a lot going on. You as the plate umpire, you've got everything in front of you. You can see pretty quickly, he's 5 steps from second as I'm coming out of my squat. I'm staying home. Make that decision early, and your partner can then adjust and save the crew. And I shouldn't even say save the crew, but your partner can adjust, and we cover the plays without issue. Now, finally, on to the third game. This was a fun one. Did feature a nice ejection, so naturally that makes it very memorable. I was on the bases. My partner was behind the plate, just a crew of 2. And, just running through the game. In the top of the first, we had runners on first and third with 2 outs. The offense ran a play to get their runner from first into a rundown, and they were able to score the runner from third before the runner was tagged out between first and second. So we had a timing play. Pretty interesting. Not going to be our only one. Of course, this one was pretty obvious that the runner got across in time, so there was no issue with it, but we noted that it happened. And this was a game that we knew had the potential to be emotional. It's a rivalry game. It's a region game. So we knew there was just going to be tension throughout the night. And we had an idea, I had an idea at least from some other game reports, that this visiting team was potentially going to be something to handle. And honestly, it started at the plate meeting when the visiting team coach came out, and first thing he said to us was a complaint about how the batter's boxes were drawn. So if that's where you're leading with, probably a sign of where our night is going to go. So happy Wednesday. So throughout the game, their dugout kept chirping, especially my plate umpire, about balls and strikes. And I'd given him the head up in the pregame that they had a little bit of a reputation, to put it lightly. But in my pregame, I told him something that I often tell a lot of my crews, especially going into like postseason games or maybe a weekend series. But early in the game, identify someone in the dugout that if you have to eject someone and you're not exactly sure who it was, but whatever was said absolutely across the line, try to have someone in mind that you're going to get. That makes you more confident in handling situations. It doesn't make you feeling like, oh, I couldn't figure out which one it was. Because when something crosses the line, you need to be able to act immediately without freezing. And they don't get to just hide because they're one of 15 in the dugout. Not acceptable. Your options then are either pick and choose or go ahead and get the head coach. It's his dugout, right? Look, if I'm in a playoff crew and my guys are on the lines, first and third, I always tell them in the pregame, have somebody picked out on your bench, especially if it's becoming an issue. Ideally, a bench player who probably isn't going to come into the game anyways, but pick somebody, right? And my plate umpire, to his credit last night, had done that, and he told me after the game he knew who he was going to get if he needed to. And we talked about that just made him more confident, though, to handle the dugout. And he had one that was a very specific comment going to come specifically from that player. But if he didn't know for sure, he'd seen that kid going off before saying stuff, and that was going to be the one. So it's a strategy to have in your tool belt. Don't take this the wrong way. In my 17 years of umpiring total, I've never actually had to use this on a dugout. at any level, but it's a good tool to have, and it builds a little confidence. In fact, it actually goes back to where I got this was actually from watching a John Boy video of a Yankees ejection. And the plate umpire, it was obnoxious coming out of the dugout. He picked a player that he thought might have been it, tossed him. And, John Boy's video showed it wasn't really them, but it didn't matter. It came out of the dugout. I got who I thought it was. If you didn't want that to happen, handle your dugout. And Aaron Boone comes out and he goes, no, that was me. It wasn't him, but he was trying to protect his players. And the plate umpire, I think it might have been Brennan Miller. But anyways, the plate umpire looks him in the eyes and says, okay, then you're gone too. And Aaron Boone goes, whoa, hold on. But that's how you come back to that card, right? Like, these coaches are going to do something like that. It's not uncommon, but don't let them get away with it. And we never take back ejections. But this is just an example of, like, sometimes somebody's got to pay the price. If your team didn't want to pay the price, maybe you'd behave in a sportsmanlike manner. Again, never really had to use this, but it's a good tool to have in your pocket. So now going back to the team, we did have to warn the team once. We came back at them pretty hard after some pretty aggressive bench jockeying, somewhere around like the third or fourth inning. Honestly, I think my partner could have done it earlier, being the plate umpire and being right there on it all. But we came back at them pretty hard with it, at least at one point. I mean, it kind of got the message across. And after that, I did hear the coach say a couple of times on us, which is seeming to become the important phrase for coaches to get their players to not be jerks to the other team. But again, going back to my partner and kind of what he had going on, we go back to those 5 steps that I talked about. He told me after the game that he ignored them for 3 innings, and then once it started affecting him, he finally told them, that's enough. And, well, that means he went from step 1, ignore, straight to step 4, warn. If he had used acknowledge and respond in between, he probably could have stopped it before it started getting to that point where it was affecting him and his zone. And he could have done it a lot earlier. If we let the coaches or dugouts keep riding us, ultimately it affects our calling. And it gets in our head. And it doesn't make us better, it makes us worse. So we have to stop that before it gets to that point. Now, later in the game, we had runners on first and second, ball in the dirt. The catcher blocks it out in front, and both runners advance. I was in the C position, and it was one of those where you knew they didn't get a great jump. So there might be a play at either base. There might not be any play. So, I had to pause, see where the catcher goes. He got to the ball fairly quick, and he picked to throw to second. So I turned with the ball. I'm splitting my responsibilities between second and third. Was already in the C position, and I called the runner out at second. And the coach came out after to argue it, and it wasn't a question of the tag, but he did want to argue that there had been obstruction. And I'll tell you, the honest truth is, I didn't have obstruction, but I also couldn't tell you with 100% certainty that there was an obstruction. There was a lot of contact. It did look like ultimately the fielder ended up in front of the bag between first and second, but I just didn't have any angle to fully see all of it. By the time I turned around, it's happening quickly, and from C in a 2-umpire system, looking back at second, you're not able to tell whether the fielder blocked all access to the bag, especially the backside of the bag. And that's just a limitation of the 2-umpire system. We don't get to have potentially the better angle from the first base side of the cutout at second. It's just the way it is. And so, could there have been obstruction? Possibly. But I didn't have obstruction. I didn't see it. And I told him that when he came out. I said, I don't have obstruction. I didn't say definitively there was no obstruction. You're crazy. I just said I didn't have obstruction. All I can do is tell him the truth. But moving on from there, then in the bottom of the 4th, we have runners on first and second again. There's a ball hit between third base and the plate on the line. Pitcher fields it and throws it to first, and the throw pulled the first baseman directly at me. Remember, I started in the C position with runners on first and second. I got across the working area, but just the way it worked, the way the first baseman tried to stretch to catch the ball and maintain contact with the bag, he came directly at me in my position in the working area, and I could tell it was close to pulling his foot, but I couldn't tell for sure either way, so I called the runner out. Pretty quickly, home coach came out, and I already knew what he wanted. He wanted help from my partner, and, I'm totally fine with that. Again, 2-umpire system. Sometimes we're not going to have the angle. So I went to my partner, and he said he had a good look, and the first baseman had come off the bag by about 2 inches. So we reversed the call and made the runner safe. Of course, immediately the visiting coach came out hot, yelling about it, and my partner warned him for yelling at us and then restricted him to the dugout. Now, this brings up another misconception I want to address, and this came up at our plate meeting, and it's at the plate meeting, we all have our variations of the way we do it. I personally usually do tell the coaches, if you have a question about a call, wait for a break in the action, request time. Once it's granted, then you can come ask the umpire who made the call. If we feel our partner may have additional information, we may get together and make a final decision. All of that is true. And if the final decision is we're going to keep the call, there's no discussion. But my partner added in his pregame conference that once the decision is made, there will be no discussion after that point. And that's not fully true. If we stick with the original call, then yes, we're done. Coach, I got help. We're staying with it. We got to move on. But if we change the call, the opposing coach is entitled to an explanation of why we changed it. Now, he's not allowed to come out demonstrative and screaming about it, which is what the coach did and why he got restricted, but he is entitled to an explanation. So just don't get that confused. He does have to come out in the right way. So after the restriction, my partner was writing down the notes on it, taking down the inning, etc., all that good stuff. And the pitching coach, who had already been warned a couple times about balls and strikes, came out and asked us if he could now represent the team since the head coach was restricted. And my partner got this exactly right. This is what you all need to remember. The answer is no. The reason being, the head coach is still the head coach, even if he's restricted to the dugout. You, sir, are not the head coach. If there's something that needs to be addressed, we'll go deal with him in the dugout. But you don't suddenly become the acting head coach for arguments. And, he grumbled about that. We sent him back on and play continued. Then in the top of the 5th, we have a tie game. Now the visitors got runners on first and second and third with 1 out. And great time for a 1-out time play mechanic. If you are not familiar with that, it is just like a 2-out potential time play mechanic. We just do one finger on the wrist and maybe one finger up here like this, but we're just signaling 1 out. We have a possibility of a time play. And this is actually, usually when I see a time play, it's way more often to happen on a play that started with 1 out than 2. In our game, we ended up having it. It was a ground ball to the first baseman who was holding the runner at first, or at least, close to the bag. He steps on first for out number 2, and that removes the force everywhere else because the batter runner is retired. And then he throws to second for the 3rd out. That's a time play. He did exactly that. He made that play, and I called the runner out at second on the tag, and then turned to my partner to see, was he scoring the run? My guess, based on how the play developed, was probably, but as always, this usually depends on how hard did the kid run from third. So I turned to look for my partner, and unfortunately, he'd actually come out from behind the plate towards the third base line because he was trying to see whether the slide at second was legal in case it had been the front end of a double play. Obviously, that was a mistake. As the plate umpire, if you've got a runner at third and a ground ball in the infield with a possible double play, your first responsibility is not the slide at second. Your first responsibility is the runner touching home and a possible play at the plate. You need to drop back to the point of the plate, especially with the possibility of a time play developing, like we had here. We have to understand that order of responsibility, and that in a crew of two, it does make it hard for us to correctly call that whether or not there was an illegal slide at second. It's going to live and die with your base umpire, and among all their responsibilities, they might not get it. Again, this game was just a great example of there are situations where a 2-umpire crew is not going to see everything and not going to handle everything. That's why postseason usually is 3 and then 4 umpires. That's why the MLB has 4 umpires and then 6 umpires. It makes a difference having more eyes out there. When you're in a crew of 2, we just have to accept and work with and try to minimize the impacts. But there's a reality of, in a 2-umpire system, there's only so much we're going to see and that we're going to be able to get correct. That's why it's so important that we know our order of responsibilities and work down our priority list just through that. So ultimately, we did end up scoring the run, and that was the correct ruling. I don't think there was any doubt about that. But my partner, again, he didn't recognize it fast enough, and that delay obviously added to the frustration of the visiting team. That one was more understandable frustration, right, than most of what they'd done all night. We got it right, but it was a crew mistake not to process it faster. And it certainly looks a lot better selling that call to immediately after the third out be yelling, score that run, score that run, score that run, or, no run, no run. Plate umpire wasn't there. We didn't get a chance to do that. We got it correct in the end. But, that did bring the pitching coach out again. It was one of those situations where, you screwed up as a crew enough to the fact of, it's not the hill to die on that I'm going to eject you over this and then have to put in my report, after my plate umpire screwed this up, we had to eject this coach. It might happen, but we want to avoid that if we can. And this was a great example of a time where we could. And we got the call right. It went in their favor. It was the go-ahead run, so it's obviously important. We can let there be some emotions in baseball. It's supposed to be fun. There's supposed to be emotion in it. Just part of the game. But anyway, so after that, we're not far from their dugout. He had come out to ask about it. And so I started walking him back towards his dugout. And, he started to ask me about the call at first from the previous inning that we overturned. And, I kind of said, look, he had a better angle. I hustled, but I had the best angle I could have. And it still wasn't the best. I still couldn't see it. And, he kind of kept going about it, which was like, dude, what are you doing? And I just straight up told him, I said, look, I'm doing you a courtesy talking to you right now, but you're not the head coach. I don't have to talk to you. But then he kept going. And finally, I just had to tell him that's enough. And there was my warning from me. So we have a warning at the end of the top of the fifth. And he goes back to the dugout. Well, then in the top of the sixth, they get a runner on, left-handed pitcher on the mound for the home team. Now, his delivery was legal. A couple of times you could see his shoulders, as he's starting his pitch, start to lean in towards the plate. But that's just legal, especially if you're doing it, because you're doing it at the start of your delivery. All you're telling us is you're committing to go to the plate. I can't really impersonate it left-handed, but right-handed, the same thing would apply, right? If you just go, if he's set, and then he just starts going and does this and throws home, he was just starting his delivery and starting his motion to the plate. Not a balk. I can guarantee it's not a balk. Anyways, the pitching coach for the visiting team, again, from the dugout, that's a balk. You have to call that. He's leaning. And after the pitch crossed the plate, I responded, that's not a balk. I don't want to hear it. And then he yells, you're not even paying attention. And that right there was ejectionable. That's continued arguing after repeated warnings, which will look fantastic in our ejection report, which you should be able to find redacted in the comments. But also it's a demeaning remark about my officiating, saying I'm not paying attention. Go screw yourself. So I dumped him. Once the ejection happened, first thing he does is he walks out the dugout and outside the fence to off the field and stands right next to it with his arms crossed. And we're waiting for my partner. He's writing down the notes. I have my notepad with me. I know when it happened. I'm going to write my notes down. I'm not going to do it while he's still there. I'm going to keep my eyes to make sure that he leaves, because you're gone, dude. You got to go. I noticed him staring there. And he has to go. He has to leave the vicinity. So I just held up my palm at the plate umpire. He couldn't see from where he was, but I wasn't holding up the game at that point because nothing was happening. My partner's writing, but he sees me doing that, staring at him, not making much of a facial expression, just looking. And he realizes, finally he says, "Okay, I'm going. Just let me get my stuff." And he walks back into the dugout, grabs the stuff, and leaves. And honestly, it was pretty satisfying to stare him down and let him know, "Dude, I don't care, but you got to go." And that's really all you need to do for an ejection. Once a coach is ejected, he has to leave the vicinity of the field, out of sight, out of sound, not standing outside the dugout, not hanging around, gone. So that was my first ejection in quite a while, actually, of a coach. I think in 6 years of high school ball, I've only tossed 2 coaches, both assistant coaches, by the way, weirdly enough. But so first ejection in quite a while, but a fun one, a good one, good opportunity for me to teach from it and let y'all see at least how I fill out an ejection report. So be sure to check that out. I'll have it linked in the description or comments somewhere. But anyways, those were my 3 games this week. A lot of good lessons, a lot of stuff I thought was worth sharing. Hopefully there was something in there for you to add into your own game. Feel free to shoot me any rules questions you have, any interesting situations you've run into, or any thoughts on the stuff I talked about here. I'd love to get your feedback and just get some of your thoughts on it. And, it encourages me to keep going. So I'd appreciate it. So anyways, thank you so much for listening. I hope you have a good weekend of games. And as always, I look forward to seeing you on the field.